now sort of coming over, do you think?
There's a few of them in the cafeteria, they might be coming.
Okay. So we're now starting, we're basically going to start. So hopefully people will join us. So you might want to just, let me see, I'm just going to record on here. I'll just say something to the camera, as it were. Great, oh, lovely. So just welcome to anybody who is online. We haven't got anybody online actually. So we need some more. I think maybe we'll just hold for a few minutes. But anybody watching the recording of this, either on YouTube or on our own RCA system, you are being invited to use the QR code as the basis for Alisan Atvur's talk he's just about to give you. So go ahead and do so. So guys, there's a QR code here. You could sit at the front.
Good.
They're not going to do that. We're just going to leave it a couple of minutes until we have a few more people here. But it is being recorded, and so unfortunately, when you record things, people think, "Oh, it's all right. I'll watch it later." So,
yeah,
that happens. But just give it a couple of minutes, and we'll.
Sure thing. We'll totally wait for a little while then.
Thanks. Yeah, timekeeping is never a strength of students.
I love fresh air, but not smelling air.
I'm just going to go on mute this end, otherwise you'll hear me chatting away. So hello everybody again. Anyone online? Who have we got? Carolyn. Hello, Carolyn. And we have students meandering back in. It's just too much of a good, hot, sunny day, clearly. But I think perhaps the thing to do. Oh, here we go. Hi there. We're just about to start practitioner talk. Thanks for your patience, Alisan. And you're invited. You're invited to come up and take the QR code, okay?
Has anyone got the QR code?
Takes you to menti.com.
Hi.
Oh, it's nice. It's got hearts on it.
I suppose that is the mark of achievement these days, when you can have a heart on something.
Yes, it shows somebody's listening to you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just a brief welcome as well to everybody who's watching the recordings of this, either on YouTube Live on our SDTV channel, or indeed on our Zoom recording. So this is a practitioner talk. Again, we're delighted to have Alisan Atvur here, live from Copenhagen, I believe. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right.
Very good. And you will see a QR code here that you're invited to click, and you'll be able to use that during the talk today. So, has everyone got it? They've got it. Super. Thank you very much. Welcome to Royal College of Art Service Design course. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello. As Clive was just mentioning, I'm Alisan. I'm a principal user experience researcher and designer here at Novo Nordisk, which is based and headquartered in Denmark. For those of you who don't know Novo Nordisk, we are a company that treats chronic diseases, very specifically many diseases that are sometimes hard to detect and hard to manage. I work in the early device and treatment development group, which helps us better identify what are some of the opportunities we have for making it easier to live with a treatment, making it more user-friendly, hopefully fitting into someone's life a little bit better. There's a team of individuals who are partnering across the universe or across the company in this effort, who really deserve a lot of credit involved in this practice. Today, I'll tell you a little bit about how that practice has evolved over time, and as well as give you a little bit of a history of me. But for a lot of it, I'm going to open and ask for your thoughts, your questions, and hopefully near the end of it, you'll have a little bit more of a dialogue that might be able to inform some of your own considerations. With that being said, hopefully you've been able to sign into Minty.com and you can see what is about to happen, which is I'm going to just warm up the conversation by getting an idea of what level people are in this room. If you would, try to answer about how many years of professional design experience would you say that you have? I'll wait until a few people have been able to react. Okay. So we have a number of people who have already been out in the field for a period of time, which is good to know. That allows me to go in a very different direction. Looks like we have 10 participants who have voted. Perfect. So with that being said, I'm going to tailor it to be a little bit more focused on, and I know more than 2 can mean 3 years or 30 years. That being said, I'm going to adjust it to be a little bit more conscientious of the seniority of in the room. With that being said, I am wondering for those people who are watching and attending, who are in the process of acquiring a degree, wondering if you could please just give me any thoughts or any ideas you might currently be having about what you hope to do after graduation. That could be a specific industry you want to work on, a specific type of work you hope for, a company that you've aspired to work with, just to give an idea of what we're interested in. And of course, if we don't have any thoughts towards a service designer in a consulting group, yeah. I'm fascinated to know what kind of consulting companies. Travel more is definitely a good one. Healthcare, oh cool, so we have someone who's there. Go looking for interesting problems rather than organizations to work with. Ultimately teaching, get a job as a service designer. Work in public policy, government, consultation, innovative projects. Okay, so we have a variety of different interests moving forward, and it sounds like perfect. Working in tech, solving big problems. Okay, this gives me a bit of a flavor for what are some of the things that are on your mind. I'm pretty certain that everything I'm going to share today will be relevant in some form or fashion to every single thing that I see here, even travel more, because a lot of what I'd like to share with you has to do with specifically what it's meant, at least for me, to develop as a person as well as a practitioner, because the two are part and parcel, part of your craft. Last question, and then we're going to dive into some actual things that I can present. When it comes to design these days, whether it's service design or others, what's on your mind these days? Are there specific questions? Any specific themes? Any concerns? Any topics that are on your mind are of interest? Right after you've shared that, we'll dive into some content. Final exam at RCA. All right. Anxiety, social innovation. All right. Out there, not understanding design. That is a theme that I've uncovered, I've seen as well. All right, so we have a few topics: designer, maker, user. All right, systems. Yeah. Lovely. Well, this gives me a good idea as to where you are. How can I see here, how can I do many things? Right. All right. Well, our environment, great. So good. I'm glad that what I have today, will, albeit short, I believe is going to be connected to practically everything that has been brought up to this point. We're going to talk a little bit about systems approaches facing individuals who may not always have a familiarity with design or have an assumption that might be less than ideal. We'll talk a little bit about the role of designer, maker, and in some cases, actually what it means to empathize with that user. I should say in many cases. A little bit about the environment and looking at things beyond what may be just typical user needs and considerations. So with that being said, I'll give you an introduction, a very brief one. I'm Alisan. It's a pleasure to meet you guys, albeit digitally. I've been in this line of work for about 15 years, in the sense that I've been paid for this type of work following graduation for 15 years, and in different forms and fashions. I started out as a consultant, working at a variety of groups, but actually before that, at the beginning of my consulting, I did a handful of things to prepare me for that, which I'll share in a moment. But most recently, for the past 9 years, I've been in healthcare. I'll give you a high-level kind of introduction to some of the things that have formed me and my practice the most in ways that at least surprised me. So for example, the first job I had out of university was working for Apple as a teacher. I would go around and teach and hold workshops. This was now many, many years ago. This was pre-iPhone, yeah, pre-iPhone, whereby people were making sense of what this company was and their iPods and their enterprise systems within this environment. And I would go and I would specifically work with various end users, people who would be coming into environments to take these classes that Apple designed in order to better understand how devices fit into their life. How is it that music could all fit on this little thing that's the size of a deck of cards? I really enjoyed it because the metric was how well are you helping people understand an opportunity that they may not have been able to understand beforehand. It was, without me realizing it, a great introduction to how usability testing and early and later stage user experience evaluations can be very creative formats. Because I was hearing complaints and frustrations, I was watching people interact with their devices and services. I was starting to see themes and patterns as to what people really enjoyed and got excited about, as well as things that were just disappointing people for one reason or another. I was also trained as a psychotherapist at NYU, where I studied under a great tutor who did some phenomenal things for especially helping me evolve my perspectives and my worldview. Even though my initial degree was in instructional design and communications, I was very much more fascinated with the state of wellness that a person could experience by negotiating with the ideas in their mind, by negotiating with the world around them. I didn't explicitly know how that work would connect with each other, how psychotherapy and design would work, but I was very fascinated with the fact that it was a discipline in and of itself, which had a lot of connection to some of the cognitive design principles, or I should not say cognitive design, cognition principles that we as designers sometimes consider when making products, services, systems, whatever it may be. Now, at least within the past 8 years, a lot of my focus, or I should say all of my focus, has been in the domain of healthcare. More specifically, since joining Novo Nordisk, I've been focusing on chronic diseases, more specifically, asymptomatic chronic diseases. So to give you some context, there's episodic diseases, things that happen in episodes, maybe happen once or twice in your life. Hopefully they don't never happen to you. Something like cancer can be an episode, the flu. And then there's chronic, which occur regularly through your life, such as diabetes, things like gout, other diseases such as certain forms of heart disease. There's also symptomatic and asymptomatic. The reason I give those two different differentiations is symptomatic diseases are ones you can experience. You can observe them happening in your body. For many people living with diabetes, for example, it's asymptomatic. It's affecting your body without you realizing it. So my focus has been in asymptomatic diseases, things that you may not always detect and understand or feel, chronic diseases. And those have very specific needs and challenges and opportunities based on the fact that just like any condition, any treatment needs to consider, where is a person coming from? What is a person thinking? So the challenging part about this work is that there's so much of it that is confidential because there's so much of it that's still trying to be evaluated from a medical standpoint. Can a redesign of a very specific injector potentially make it easier for someone to handle their device? Could the way in which we rework an application on a phone make it less cognitively demanding to remember certain parts of your treatment? Can the way we design a package, can the way we even design the right text on a package be a little bit easier for someone to understand who's just starting on a treatment? All of these are topics that I face on a daily basis, and I work using research in the field as primary research as well as secondary research in order to inform specific design directions or hypotheses that we'd like to test using different experiment structures. The positive thing about all of this in the past 15 years is that I've had a lot of chances to be able to share different case studies, share different topics around projects that I've done. And one of the things that I really enjoy is also being able to talk with other students and other individuals who are just curious about the field, whether it's healthcare or design or practice. So it's great to be able to continue sharing that in an environment like this. More specifically, one of the things that we here at Nova were able to do quite recently was we were able to take a look at some of the work we had done. We actually started to turn them into design case studies. Now, we're a group that's been historically a healthcare company, a pharmaceutical company. So the idea of creating like a design or an experiential case study was a little bit new to some of my colleagues. In this situation, we were able to sort of look at the past 7 years of our design practice and actually look at the ways in which we had evolved it. Every design practice that I've ever been in changes over time. New tools appear, new language appears, new modes of collaborating can appear. And the ways in which we set norms or set practices can evolve too. We basically treated that 7-year period as an opportunity to really consistently improve the way we practice it. That was especially important when COVID hit about 3 years ago, when a lot of methods had to become digital, or a lot of collaboration had to become, when I'm interacting with a person with a chronic disease, even safer or more controlled. We also had a case study on how we specifically looked at the challenge that people may have when it comes to just living with their medication. Now, both of these are case studies that you can actually find online. I can go into depth about either of them in more detail afterwards. But the thing I wanted to kind of quickly highlight here is that in the process of looking at those different evolutions that we had in those processes, our practice had kind of evolved in 4 ways, and it's still evolving. It's not like our practice stops. I say our because it's not like it's mine or his or hers. All of us are a part of establishing norms for the way in which we research the human condition, design for it, experiment with it, prototype it, all of those things. But the 4 themes that we saw were, we were consistently trying to find ways to simplify the way we operated, but we still had to be detail oriented. That had to do with the way in which we documented things in our design briefs. It had to do with the way in which we communicated things between different departments within our organization. But because we're a scientific organization, there's still a huge amount of detail that has to be considered, not just hopefully, but legally. The second is, we were trying to consistently, and we still are, finding ways to look at more and more individuals that historically we may not have understood as well. So there is not just one type of person who lives with a chronic disease. There are many, many different types of situations and circumstances that someone has when living with this disease. That should not be of any surprise. But there's also not just one type of colleague or collaborator or an employee. We work to consistently find new ways to better understand and challenge our own understanding of those things over a period of time, to the point where everything becomes a working hypothesis that we can always then revisit, rather than saying, oh, we finally understand this group, or we know what this group needs. No, here's what we think so far, based on the evidence that we have. Third, and perhaps the most important one, at least in my entire professional career, is finding a language that fits for the people who are speaking it. This doesn't mean creating a new language just for the sake of coining a new term or grabbing land. I work with engineers, chemists, designers. I worked with a tolerance chain expert earlier today, an expert in chemical processing and API development, and all of them have a different way of understanding the process of getting to a good final treatment. Finding a way to talk about this thing called design or this process called design that fits with them, and bear in mind, many of them are from other countries who may not be native English speakers, is a process that took a little bit of iteration, not because we wanted one word to trump another, but instead we wanted understanding to be the goal. And then finally, we found ourselves consistently shape-shifting between roles. This can also be said for my career. At some points, I found myself reacting as a consultant. At some points, I was a contributor, and sometimes I'm a coach. Those three roles are different in the sense that a contributor may be doing a lot of the work that is involved in the making or the establishment of the next step. A consultant is advising on the actions that someone is doing in that, sometimes for a project, sometimes for a leader. Whereas a coach, in this case, I'm only using these as working definitions for here, as a coach is kind of advising on how someone might think or plan or review some of their own decisions or behaviors. So I coach, for example, senior executives on design methods. I will consult on various projects if we don't have any precedent for addressing a certain therapy area or a new condition. And in some occasions, when the project is complex enough, I'll even contribute just to help set certain examples of what could be done. There's never just one. In fact, I evolve regardless of the title I've had. In fact, I've gone from being manager at times to a director to a contributor. And then regardless of the title, those three roles still kind of appeared at different times based on what was needed. It's just that sometimes based on my position, that may evolve a little bit. So you could kind of at a high level say that there's 6 different domains in which I found myself working a lot in, whether that was process design, project consulting for different groups. I used to work with Frog in San Francisco, a group called Propelland as well, both of which are international design consultancies that work in a variety of spaces. I've worked in user experience strategy for complex early projects. The small differentiation I'm making here when I say strategy is when you're making a plan for how you might begin certain design pursuits and design initiatives based on what are some of the opportunities. I'm sure there's lots of words for describing what I'm at least calling UX strategy. I've worked in team and project management from the coaching level to the mentoring manner to the direct report manner, as well as creating in-house practices. Quite some time ago, I was introducing to one of the firms I've mentioned the idea of introducing more and more service design work. And that was almost laughable to the group. And I had to remind them that as we start to revisit the way in which we design and what we design, we may have different terms, but it's important to at least figure out how might we use whatever tools we have or approaches we have to solve the problems we're facing today, knowing full well those aren't going to be the same ones we had beforehand. And it's something that won't stop. It's not like, all right, great, we're done. We've developed our practice. It's an evolution. All of this has also led me to writing a book, which was centered around the idea that every person who's involved in this creative process of design, and I mean that in a pretty liberal sense, can have opportunities for either managing themselves, managing projects, managing their own expectations. And the book's sort of focused around being able to look at different ways in which teams can be onboarded, kick off projects, how they resolve conflicts with each other, how they maintain growth within themselves as a person, how they maintain team development. And this was because this is part of what got me interested in psychotherapy. I like the idea of practitioners and professionals doing exceptional things that even impress themselves, and then just seeing that flourish. The same thing goes for what drew me to psychotherapy. I love the idea of someone finding a pathway to self-healing. That's exciting. Now, the thing about this, and this is where I'll transition into one last section before I ask some questions, is I ended up not publishing this book. You can actually try to order it on Amazon and a variety of other places, but you can't actually get it. At the end, due to a variety of different challenges, the decision was made not to publish it. There were certain things that I felt were in clash with some of my values, some of my virtues. And the difference I use there is a virtue is something you practice, a value is a belief. I found myself feeling like it wasn't the right time. So I ended up now, I still share these these activities, these approaches in different workshops and different meetings, but I try not to sell them. And this is partially because over the course of my 15 years as a practitioner, I found myself kind of reflecting on some of my values. And it's not as though that my values have been stagnant things. They're quite dynamic. They change as I experience something. I keep something called a pain journal. And this pain journal is after every project, and I started this in the early 2000s. After every project, I write down like, what is something that was in one small A5 page, what was the painful part of this project, this initiative, this article that I wrote? Why was it painful? And what will I be able to think about differently or do differently because of this? I did this because I was finding myself not really always having the mentor I hoped for or the manager I might have needed at that time to sometimes give me that advice or to spar with me. So this ended up becoming, without me realizing it, a bit of my own personal self-help book, whereby I still go back and periodically read the pages. It's an old Moleskine that has a Star Wars imprint on it that's kind of worn out. And my wife, who's also in the industry, knows exactly where that lives in my house. She's also in the field and knows exactly how I use it. And when she sees me reading it, she knows that I'm reflecting on something. But it's been a practice that's been very helpful to make sure that I don't forget some of the lessons that sometimes I can forget. I put some of those together in my website, but I want to make sure that I'm timestamping them because these are values and ideas that need to evolve as I grow as a person. I hope that in the next 15 years, I'm better than the designer and practitioner I was in my first 15 years. Ideally, in my last 15 years or however many I have, I'm even stronger, but that comes from being very mindful about reflecting. That's where this comes in. This is at least a little bit of a mental model that goes through my head without ever explicitly saying it, that I wanted to share with you. All of this is to say that after 15 years, for better or for worse, of doing work in this field, I found myself around these 5 ideas and this little process at the bottom. Philosophically speaking, I have a bit of a personal code that I've been told almost sounds like it's militant, which is I really believe in the values of truth, honor, and service. Truth being a pursuit of just investigating what is and what may be. Honor, in this case, being in alignment as best as you can with the expectations that you set for yourself. And service, in this case, being serving the people around you, serving the end users you seek to serve. When it comes to my aspiration, I say aspiration because I don't think y'all ever fully reach it. I believe in authenticity and kindness and compassion. And as much as that may sound a little bit more like a self-help book, I would argue these are critically important for my work in sitting down with a person who may be at the late stage of his or her life and listening to her live with a disease and what pain points wreck their family because of those. Without authenticity, I'm not able to be present and real. Without kindness, I'm not able to even feel invited into the door. And without compassion, I need to be able to suffer with that person in order to even begin to touch a little bit of empathy. And I won't fully be able to grasp it, but I need to be able to acknowledge that. When it comes to the practical tools, there's 3 things that kept on coming up with all of my work that I find when I do it or when I see the practice doing this, it's so much stronger. I'm a big believer in the idea of preparation in the biggest sense. Being able to be prepared is a form of respect, whether that is doing research before designing a product, which is a part of my life, or whether that means considering the implications of how a research room will actually be set up to make sure that the person I'm researching feels comfortable. It could even be in the sense that before we got started, I wanted to make sure I had an idea of the type of people who are watching, the type of people who are involved. I believe it's a huge part of professionalism. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as like 100% prepared, but the intention of doing that is a part of the spirit of user centricity and research. It's preparing oneself by understanding a scenario, which leads us to the next one, planning. I'm a big advocate for the idea that by setting realistic expectations, which are also ambitious, it makes it so much clearer to collaborate. One way that I've sometimes used this phrase is by the idea of think, ink, and sync, which I gave a presentation in Cambridge about this a few years ago, whereby I explained that to me is my fundamental process. Thinking enough that I can ink something out, draw something out, and then synchronize with a team so that I can go back into that loop of thinking, inking, and syncing over and over and over again. In that sense, being able to set an expectation, okay, what is the project's goal? What is the intention of this document? What is the intention of this prototype? Is not meant to make everything documented for the sake of documentation, but to actually make collaboration that much smoother. Which brings us to the fifth one. When it comes to communicating in collaboration, I'm a big advocate for thinking visually, as I'm sure many of the people in this audience are. With the idea being that as we think visually and understand problems through a visual landscape, whatever format that may be, whether that is a wireframe or a mental model diagram, you choose, we have a better opportunity of addressing some of the limitations of spoken word. I'm a big fan of spoken word and verbal language. I also believe that multiple ways of communicating will hopefully catch some of the things that are lost, which brings me to the bottom row. I tried to, in 2019, which I guess is, wow, 3 years ago, try to visualize, 2018, because this was before COVID, visualize what this actually meant to me as a process, as a designer. This was mainly because this was me just trying to make sense of how do I be the best servant of the public as I could be, since I really hope to be lucky enough to work in healthcare for much of my life. And I saw it as the process of seeking truth, trying to honor that truth as a witness to someone in research or as a person who is trying to communicate insights and ideas to different companies. And then in the process, honor the life that I'm trying to listen to, respect as a cycle. So in that sense, I perform research. I try my best to maintain authenticity. I will definitely give interpretation when I'm sharing out my design research to different groups, but I try to make sure that I'm always adhering to what I believe is an ethical way of communicating. I'll give you a very specific example. In previous years of my consulting, I would often find a truth about a person, let's say, who's drinking a product, a very successful food and beverage product. And in the process of realizing a truth behind it, I realized that there was an ethical issue, that promoting that product or service even more may be in conflict with that person's well-being. That's concerning. And I had to figure out, how do I both honor the truth of this as well as that person's story while still addressing the client? I wish I had a formula for knowing how to do that. A lot of that has been me just trying to evaluate, what can I do in alignment with these principles that still allows me to do my project? It still allows me to serve. In the process of doing this, hopefully I'm able to better serve life and better to facilitate action. Now, again, a lot of this starts to get a bit meta, but that also happens because this is the result of just thinking a lot about what has now been probably thousands of user interviews in 4 industries in a variety of countries, and trying to figure out, what does it mean to listen and make and imagine with people? Whether it's a physical product, a digital service, a physical and digital service, a museum experience, all of those have been different examples. Which is where I would invite you to start to think about certain things, such as, just for this activity, I'm fascinated. If I gave you these 3 items of, and it looks like there's a 4th one that has come up accidentally. Maybe that is because this is an old version. See, I haven't failed to be the prepared person I wanted to be. I'm wondering how you might prioritize, let's just say, the top 3 things mentioning right here. Go ahead and try to use Minty to tell me in your personal work how you would prioritize these. And it looks like, it seems as though that, all right. What I appreciate about what's happening right now is it's indicative of, I think, a little bit of reality. which is, it's not as though that one of these is unimportant. It's just that at any given time, we're having to make multiple considerations about what is and is not right. It's not like I'm proposing that we could leave a perfectly commercially successful life in compensation, or a perfectly designful life. I just invented that term. In terms of the quality of the work we're doing, it's not as though that we can prioritize one level of our personal morality versus the other. There's always the dynamic challenge of figuring out, what does this mean in terms of who I am as a person? What does this mean in terms of the people who are going to eventually be using these products and services? And I wish it was as simple to say, like, well, I will always, choose quality over compensation, or I'll always choose blank over blank. But what I found is that there are honest negotiations that have to go in, both in your heart as well as with the people you work with, in order to set yourself up for more success. I'm actually interested in looking at the raw data here, because a little bit later I can actually see how much of a divide there was. So the next question, and this is where I'd love to turn this into a little bit of a conversation so I can better understand where you're from, is what is a painful or a difficult experience you might have faced in your design work, and why was it painful? You can give as little or as much information here. The reason being is I'm a big advocate of the belief that by understanding what was a difficult moment or difficult point of a project, you start to realize why that might have been difficult for you as a practitioner or as a person. And then that is a gateway for also seeing whether or not you want to change the way you collaborate, or improve the way in which you handle conflict, or nothing at all. You might discover something about how you feel about yourself in that environment, in that situation.
Anyone brave enough to?
Well done.
Oh, is it on there? Oh, okay, great.
No implementation after delivery of hard work. I have been there. Oh, I've given months of my life in a hotel room while at a studio, only to find that it just didn't happen. Oop. Let's see here. I just want to scroll. The outcome does not reach my expectations. Self-criticism is a natural, at least in my opinion, a natural part of our work, and it means that you're still evaluating your taste, and it could hurt. I've had things that might have been commercially successful, but I felt like that's not right. Give me some pretty screens. Expectation of management being well below the potential of design projects. Yeah, okay. That is a part of that. Oh, that could take so many different flavors. The client who has hired you doesn't necessarily care about the well-being of users. That is a huge issue. One of the, I would say, small benefits of being in the healthcare industry, especially when it comes to regulated industry, is that then you have a legal argument for when you have to say something does or does not meet safety expectations. Now, that doesn't necessarily always mean that it's connected to the value a user perceives in it, but at least there's something to sort of say, we have to consider people. When the CEO thinks they know best, yeah, that's very frustrating. There used to be this thing that people would tell me, which was like, well, what was his name? Steve Jobs never did research, which is technically untrue. If you look at his tax returns, you'll actually see that there was research Apple did, but they did different types of research. They didn't do specific market research at different times, but that doesn't necessarily mean the idea of understanding a person is completely devoid of it. An argument I've sometimes made is the goal, hopefully, of research is to have some sort of insight into what a person may need or struggle with. That may be something that you can come to by the virtue of performing different types of research and analysis. It may be something that you've been gifted with seeing early on, but it's dangerous to design without some form of insight into human behavior and your audience's needs. Working with clients I morally objected to, forced to execute projects below my quality standards. Oof, yeah. I've had that situation. I've actually had to resign from a company, and I went on stress leave once many years ago because of that. And it did not make my employer happy, and I felt like a miserable person. Like I felt like a failure as a designer when I did it. In reflection, what I discovered was that it's helped me discover what types of stress and pain points I can deal with. For example, I can deal with the stress of complexity. I can deal with the stress of hard work and long hours. But when I find as though that there is a moral conflict, that kind of stress is not. I was doing some research last year whereby I heard a very interesting designation. It was about neurologist, whereby a neurologist was explaining that you can move the needle between stress and stimulation. One thing, a task, can be stressful for one person and stimulating for another. One of the things that I've only learned too late in my career is that the faster you can identify what is stimulating versus stressful for you, the better you're able to sort of tell where or at least where I've been able to tell where I can work my best. So whereby I could take certain tasks that other people look at and go, oh, that seemed terribly stressful to me if you had to do that. I'm like, no, it's actually something I get stimulated by, and vice versa. Let's see some other ones. Oh, let's get it. Oh, come on now. Let's go back. Let's go back. The client has hired you. The outcome does not reach my expectations. Being constrained by bad company frameworks, which caused me to produce work I wasn't proud of. Yeah. Is anyone interested in sharing, hopefully verbally, something that they've changed about their practice based on one of their pain points?
Okay, the mic is on now. Just need brave people. Repeat. Painful. Repeat your question, please.
Yes,
Michelle?
yes. Is there anything that any of you have changed about the way that you practice design based on a pain point or a challenge that you've had beforehand?
I have one, maybe. I think compared to a few years ago, when I take any side hustles, I'm much more selective, and I always think about what can I learn from this. Whereas previously, I just took everything, and that made me really overwhelmed at times.
Yeah. Being discerning is, I think, a great skill. I've found, for example, things that in my practice where I thought this would be boring or uninteresting, and then I discovered just how stimulating it was in the process of it. I mean, the other one is better too, where you're like, oh, I know there's a certain industry, I won't say which, I refuse to work with ever again because it's so there's many problems with it, and I wish the industry the best. But I had to learn that from like having several projects where I'm like, nope, no more of that. I've got friends who work in that and they're fine. But there's the opposite too, where at some points I find myself, like I said, just going, how is this? This is great. Why aren't we talking about this at more design conferences? This is really interesting about this specific nuance of this specific part of this specific detail of healthcare. So cool. Anyone else?
One of my reflections is to ask way more questions. I think early on in my career, I would be like so excited that there was just design projects of like, yes, that was just before anything, like jump feet first. And then I learned the painful way that there was no aligned vision, no budget, no resource, no, all the things you need to deliver a successful project often weren't there. And so have your 10 questions up front and make sure you've gone through the due diligence of getting answers to them. Yeah.
One of the activities that. Sorry, go ahead.
We've got a couple more here.
Yeah, please.
Regarding frameworks, company frameworks, early on in my career, I was very good about sort of putting up with it and making do. And then as I advanced and got more confident, I got really loud about things that I didn't like. And I would frequently draft proposals for how to change the framework within my company. And that really helps it support my subordinates as well as the overall company. Gave me more opportunities, frankly.
Yeah.
Did you want to say?
Yeah. Another one was especially working with clients and like point of contacts. In the beginning, they will buy into the grand vision and everything, but and that sort of happened a lot. And after that, they would not just implement anything. So what I started doing was profiling the clients and people themselves much in advance, so that the work I was providing to them and I was estimating my effort in the way and not buying into just their words and looking beyond what their capacity to do and what their capacity to promise is, because in the end it's a partnership, right? And I have to give my effort in accordance to what they are going to provide me as well.
Yeah. Oh, the understanding what a group can and can't do and getting that in a transparent way. And I'm only pulling parts of what you set out. I don't want to oversimplify it. Has been one of those necessary challenges I've had to every project, even with the company that I'm working with, and I've been with them for 7 years. It actually goes back to a lot of the stuff that's in this slide here, which is I find that no matter how it may seem really basic, super basic, but I still keep going back to the fact that there's a really clear difference between a prepared meeting and an unprepared meeting, a prepared workshop and an unprepared workshop. Someone who has a plan for how this design project's going to go versus someone who's winging it. Now, that doesn't mean one is good or bad. I'm not passing judgment. I'm saying I observe how the work is done is so significantly different and therefore has a different impact on my stress or stimulation that I don't know the one right way to plan things. I just have gotten to the point, at least in my career, where I'm like, I'm not going to go and just completely go with zero plan or with a really ambiguous plan that says 4 weeks, design phase. No. But I don't think at my first year out, I would have felt that as much. I would have thought, oh, okay, all-nighters, things like that. And maybe it's because I'm getting older and my tolerance is lower. But are there any specific thoughts or values or virtues that you feel connect with you? Something that you feel like is incredibly important to you as a practitioner?
I think it's mostly the value of my practice, like even the value of the smaller things I'm doing. So especially if I'm working in a team, and as designers do work in teams, the whole aspect of communication and being heard in many ways, and also learning how to listen to other people and valuing each other has been of the most importance to me while especially in the professional experience.
Yeah.
Just Alisan, one thought that came to my mind when you were talking about planning and preparation was in many ways it comes back to self-respect and respect of others. And there's something lovely, kind of lifts you a little bit when you're in a meeting and you're saying, this is why design is important, this is how it's going to work. And you express that and you execute it, which then conveys a message to people around you that this is actually a really important part of the process. Designers aren't just here to put colors on it. They're actually here to design the experience of doing the exploration, the interviews, and whatever else is being done. And it sends a very clear message that this is an important part of the process, and these are important resources.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I should mention that the slide that I'm showing with you, I have never, and I don't really ever share this with clients or colleagues or projects, because this is so essential to I guess me as Alisan, that sometimes hopefully you pick this up by working with me. You pick it up by knowing that I come with a plan or I try to visualize. At least that's my intention. I may not always succeed to do it, but that's my intention. In that sense, I think each individual may have their ideas as to what are their practical values or virtues, what are some of their philosophical goals that perhaps without realizing it or not, people are picking up on when they interact with them. And that helps define a little bit more of the relationship. It reminds me of an example of one of my first friends in the industry who I'm still friends with, who was still is a huge advocate for ethical service design from governments. He's a bit controversial in certain ways, very, to some extent, anti-government. He had and understandably so, he immigrated from the US from a country that was war-torn and was trying to find more and more ways to use design to address these issues. And that part of his ethos was so strong that it actually colored the way he communicated. And I don't say this in a bad way. It colored the way he communicated. It colored the way in which he framed a problem. He also acknowledged the fact that coloring influences him. And the way in which he visualized things, for example, when he would diagram information maps, even the way he was a phenomenal and still is a phenomenal graphic designer. His strokes, his directions would show a certain tension and an energy that came out. What he also felt like he needed to explain would be different based on what he thought was important. I don't know if you've ever been in a presentation like this where someone's going through the details of a very specific design decision and you're like, why are we covering this? And it just might be so long. And then they don't look at another topic where you're like, but wait, we've totally skipped that. I'm a believer that that's also a reflection of what is important to you as a practitioner and what is important to you as your perspective. But that also comes back to how are we preparing our audience and our team members to know what we are going to be addressing. One of the things I've now started to do with my projects is sort of said, okay, and you've probably done some effect of this with your own work. What is a successful project look like, feel like at the end? And we define kind of what that sensation is. Who's happy? What are they talking about? How are they describing it? Just like the same way you might do for, say, a game storming activity for a product you're designing. Oh, what does success look like? How will users respond to? What will be the headline in the newspaper? You know those activities. In this case, we basically said, for this collaboration, what will we say? What will have happened? And then that helps to define the way in which we set team norms for, okay, well, how are we going to make a presentation together? If you've met 3 or 4 people for the first time together, that's usually one of the more difficult things for me to figure out, like, all right, we're supposed to present a project together in collection. How are we going to do that without accidentally stepping on each other, without completely going against one person's, norms and ideas, and still sound like a cohesive voice? Because I'm not the type of person who has to say, we're all going to agree. Like, there's going to be points where there's good disagreement, but we still need to figure out a way to communicate. And how might that way look? I don't always have the answer, but I definitely want to figure it out earlier rather than later. I wanted to open up for questions. We're near the last 10 minutes of the hour and just see if anyone had any thoughts or reflections.
I'll check the chat as well, just see if anything on.
Oh, is there a chat?
I'm looking at the chat at the moment.
I have one question to kick things off. I was fascinated. I love your shape shifting, by the way. I love that because we've all done shape shifting. We all will do shape shifting. So in a way, I wished I'd kept a diary of my shape shifting, but I'll go back to my LinkedIn profile and do a map like yours, which I really love. But I also loved your pain journal, and I was reflecting on if I'd written a pain journal, it probably would have been a novel by now. But when you look at your pain journal, how do you use that to motivate you to move forward? When you say you hope your next 15 years is even more amazing than your past 15 years, how do you turn your pain around to motivate you to make your next 15 years even more amazing?
Good question. I can tell you how I'm using it now, and I'm not sure how successful I'm at, and I can give you a very specific example of one. There is a page about a project that we'll just call, we'll say it's a project, the project. One of my more painful ones that, I mean, I felt like it went in a direction where I couldn't, no one was sort of recognizing or acknowledging some of the pain points that I was addressing with the direction we were going. And it just kept on going and kept on going. And it was those very pain points that ended up hurting the project later on. And it frustrated me because I remember thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why am I not communicating this? This is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. There's got to be, should I be talking to someone different? And I just felt terrible. And I remember thinking about that and processing over it. And it's forced me to kind of think about what are some creative ways to escalate and talk about topics when I'm not always comfortable or when I don't entirely know who to talk to about or when. And so that's forced me to kind of diversify some of my communication methods, as well as relearn how to write an email. I'm still trying to improve the way in which I write emails, and I'm in my late 30s. I say that because that's a huge part of the collaboration process as a designer. I know it sounds like a small thing, but the way in which I can hopefully inspire or set a tone and clearly set the next step for whatever the process is a part of facilitation. It just happens to be that it's happening in Outlook. And so now, for example, when I faced a similar situation about 3 or 4 years ago, I found that, okay, I knew what I wasn't going to do. This didn't work beforehand, or this didn't work with this person. Maybe I could try it slightly differently with that person. So it's like I had layers of skin or a bit of scar tissue to kind of get me through the discomfort of trying something new, and I try it. That's part of it. The other part of it is I don't necessarily want fewer pains, because this work is hard. I mean, as it should be, I think. But instead, I kind of want to know that I'm not still as impacted by what was hurting me beforehand. I want to make a really clear designation. I should rephrase. I don't want to make the same mistakes that I made beforehand. I still want to kind of feel and be impacted whenever I go out into the field and talk with a user, and I still am whenever I'm interacting with people. But I'd really like to know that I'm not making the same mistakes I made beforehand. So that list makes sure that I'm kind of like checking off in my head, oh, you remember when that happened in 2007? You are not doing that. Oh, you remember 2011 with that retailer? Nope. What are you going to do at the beginning of the project? You're gonna clarify this, like those kind of things.
It's almost even like emotional processing of all the experiences to then take the lesson learned and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Some of them are very functional. Like some of the things have to do with like, I write a design brief completely differently now. I shouldn't say completely differently. I write it faster, yet more holistically and with different types of details now. And that if I were to compare it to the first medical project I had maybe 12 years ago, it is very different. I hope that it's for the better, but it's also from learning, okay, this is what I saw from this pain point and this failure in this project and this, until eventually now I go, oh, okay, when I write a brief, it's going to have these 6 sections. It's going to have these specific details. This is how I'm going to talk about goals. This is what I'm going to avoid.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, thoughts, reflections?
Yeah. So this type of sort of awareness and documenting and journaling in many ways is really cool and extremely significant as well. But do you find or have you ever found yourself like this and this type of thinking becoming more like a barrier in practice in some ways? Like sometimes, do you think that it would have just been easier to let loose? Sometimes, especially when it comes to creative practices, design, and stuff like that. Have you ever encountered such experiences where you sort of doubt your approaches in many ways too, retrospectively?
If I understand it correctly, do I ever doubt some of my own conclusions and approaches that might have come from these experiences? Yeah. Because I think just because I had the mistake and I recognized it doesn't mean, oh, I figured it out, or it even means it could have been the circumstances that were involved there that made something different. I think the thing that I'm trying not to do is forget what happened or overgeneralize. And I have a habit, because at least from the type of work that I do, of having to absorb so much domain knowledge about a different therapy area or a specific focus, that I feel like I'm having to focus on things and I might forget some of the best practices that I've found for myself that worked beforehand. But I would not be surprised at all if the way in which I'm doing it now, I also go, holy crap, that's not working either. But that's also a part of me trying to, perhaps it's the scientific part of me that's trying to figure out, okay, my working hypothesis as to what could hopefully make this project successful are these following norms and these things. But I could be wrong. And I mean, I honestly hope I know whether I'm wrong. And I guess wrong is even a misnomer, because it's not about right or wrong. Is this helping me achieve the goals that this project set out for? And I wish I had standards that I could say it's always this for me now, or now I don't ever do that. But right now it's just like the way I see it is, on this day, at this time, for this project, here's what my experience tells me might be the right path. And being prepared to know that tomorrow, at that day, at that time, maybe I'll think differently. So the way for example, I look at design tools evolves because of that. So I'll look at the same tool differently one day versus another based on what I think.
I'm needing to wrap up. Any final questions? Any burning thoughts?
Thanks a lot for the talk. That's super insightful and super helpful. Just one question on preparation and planning. Like I think that's something that I've also learned during my practice, how important it is. But often these two things, they get derailed very quickly. And there are so many factors, like if you prepare for a meeting and just some stakeholders on some other tangent altogether, get derailed, or if you plan something and like it doesn't work out. So how do you negotiate these situations and how do you sort of get around them?
It's such a good question. The reason I'm saying ooh is because especially earlier in my career, I was very rigid about how I planned and like we need to do this and this, and then sometimes that worked, sometimes I didn't, and then I was like, well, maybe I should be very, very loose about it. And again, sometimes that worked, and sometimes it didn't. And then I was thinking, all right, well, should I document it, or should it be preparation early versus preparation late? So preparation, like if it's a workshop, preparation early, it might be, I'm going to design the workshop a week before I get there, versus preparation late would be like, I'm going to design the workshop with the group when I get there, like, so it's kind of a 2x2 matrix. And the thing was, there wasn't like a place that is perfect. That was at least one of the learnings for me, that every circumstance will be different. I have had situations where I thought, all right, I need to really prepare this activity quite specifically, and then found out, no, I don't. That was actually unnecessary. Or I thought I probably need to do this in this specific way, and it changes. Instead, I'm a big advocate for saying, what type of planning will help and when does it need to occur? And even planning 10 minutes before going into a meeting is better, for example, for me, than no planning, because at least then I've rehearsed key points or something. So it's not necessarily always the Gantt chart that I'm describing about. It's the premise of like before an action occurs or before a decision occurs, what might need to occur sometime before it to help us set us up for a good decision, whether that's which stakeholders are involved, what's the objective, is there going to be a bulleted list of checkpoints that we have to cover? Does that react to your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I guess like in a lot of ways, it's contextual, but having like a best practice just helps you.
Yeah.
Just, 10 minutes before the meeting, I will take some time to think about what I'm going to say.
Yeah. And I work with different people who have different perspectives towards it. I've got some colleagues who are bullet to bullet or moment to moment, like will choreograph the second, and others who are like, I'll just wing it. But they also have a certain amount of preparation. One of the meeting rooms that I'm in is slowly getting kicked out. I'm getting kicked out. But
Alisan, we should wrap you up, and we should be respectful of your time as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for preparing the material, for being available for us, and for sharing your perspectives with our audience online and in the room as well. Thank you very much, Alisan.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and feel free to reach out. Cam has